a kind or modality of consciousness based on as to what all this is kind or modality of consciousness based on. Now, we are mostly brought up kind or modality of consciousness in all different kinds of culture, mostly Western or modality, African, Latin American, Eastern, different kinds of culture. Individual human beings, by and large, are African, Latin American in some way. Different kinds of individual human beings, by and large, are African, Latin American in some way. Different kinds of individual various ways of describing African, Latin American in some way. Individual various ways of describing African, Latin American in some way. When the child is made to feel a subordinate member of the family. Because when children come into the world, we play all kinds of funny tricks on them. We are not at all honest with them. The first thing you notice is that when people start talking baby language, that's not being fair with a child. You get these, I've been watching some educational television, and there are these sort of funny school teacher type girls who are very well meaning. But they always roll their eyes and lift their eyebrows when they talk. And talk kind of simple, direct baby language of this kind. Dear children, we are all, what nice boy will do this, that, and the other, you know. Ugh. Because this isn't direct speaking at all. It's not the way you'd speak to each other. Creating children as a separate class. A child, if you don't treat a child in the same way as you would treat any other person, the child is instantly bewildered. Why do you come on to me in a different way you come on to somebody else? Because when we don't welcome children frankly into this world, saying, how do you do? You're another one of us. And we're going to explain to you what's going on. We're playing the following games, and these are the rules of the games. And if you will please understand these rules, you will later on maybe be able to think up better ones. But what we do is we mystify children. We put them through all kinds of complicated grades of initiation. And most of us, therefore, grow up as still children. We grow up always thinking that there is a parent above us. And if our parents are long ago dead, now I'm a grandfather, I have 5 grandchildren. See? Therefore, I'm able to, I suppose, assume in their eyes as much authority and as much dignity as my own grandfather did. But I know I'm just as stupid as he was. So, because you see, in our most impressionable years, we get the idea constantly, there is someone up there and behind who knows the answers. And to a certain extent they do, because they're more experienced, they've practiced skills, they're more developed in certain ways, but we never are really able to get people to grow up, to come into the state of adulthood, without still taking the infantile attitude. There is something, someone who knows the answers better than we do. And therefore, we always have, through this kind of childhood indoctrination, an attitude towards the universe and towards the ultimate reality behind it, of as if we were on probation, as if somehow we were interceding. We were saying constantly to the Lord God, please forgive me for having the disgusting effrontery to exist. And that goes back, you see, to archaic notions of the world, as if it were a political state modeled after the political states of the ancient Near East, where great tyrant kings were the fathers and rulers of the people. I'm constantly puzzled as to how the citizens of a republic, such as the United States, who are supposed to believe that a republic is the best form of government, can believe that the universe is a monarchy. It is a completely inconsistent idea. If the universe is a monarchy, then the monarchy is the best form of government. You ought to have one here. No, I rather feel, if I can put this into words at all, this sort of experience, that we are not strangers in this universe. Although we've all been somehow, slightly with our own connivance, been hoodwinked into thinking that we are. And we say, I came into this world. I feel myself put upon by fate, by chance, by my environment, or whatever. And we take the attitude that we are in some way or other victims of the scheme of things. And therefore most of what we experience is defined as what happens to us. And only a very small part of what we experience is defined as that which we ourselves do and wish and decide upon. So we feel experience as a conflict on the one hand between our efforts and willing and wishing, and on the other hand, what simply happens. And therefore we feel sort of tossed about like ships on an enormous swell in relation to the rest of the world. But when you really consider your own existence, you can't account for it as something introduced into this world from outside. What you are as a total being, that is not only what you think and are aware of, but also all that you don't think about and aren't aware of. The whole structure of your organism, that you are this is a symptom, an expression of the whole thing that's going on. In a certain sense, you are just as much a part of an essential expression of the universe as the sun is, or a galaxy is. Only, we tend to think of ourselves as discontinuous with the whole thing. In this way. When you look, let's say, at a photograph in a newspaper, you look at it with a magnifying glass, the picture disappears, and you see only an area of dots. But when you stand away from it and drop the magnifying glass, the dots merge into a face. So when you look at anything close up, you don't see its relatedness to everything else. Look at the dots under the magnifying glass, and you don't see their connection with the face. So our view of our own personal lives, our own work, and our own personal circumstances is a very close-up view. And we don't see how it fits in with some larger design. We're too close to it. And we can argue it doesn't fit in. We feel we really are separate. We're not connected with this whole thing. Our life, my life as an individual, is just a flash between two darknesses. Well, there are all sorts of other flashes going on. Before we were born and after we die. Flash, 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 flash. But between all these different flashes, which are like the dots in the newspaper photograph, there are, for those who want to see, connections. After all, you think of your body as a connected, unified reality. But if you look at your body from a certain point of view, you are composed of molecules that are vastly separate in space. But because those molecules are so tiny, and the separations between them so tiny as to escape your notice, you don't see that you're nothing as you stretch out your apparently solid arm. This is just all the way down. See? Is that some bird? Oh. So, yeah. It's all right. Don't interrupt him, because he's going to make a very amusing comments at certain points. But you see this, that when you take the small in view, you don't see the connectedness. And therefore, you would say now, is this the solidity, the continuity of this arm, is that real? And a person who always thinks in terms of the microscopic would say, no, it's not real, it's only an illusion. The reality is all those separate molecules. Then the physicist comes along to him and says, that's a lot of nonsense. Those molecules aren't there at all. They're only minute electrons and other subnuclear particles. But actually, you see, everybody's point of view is correct. It is correct that there are these widely separated little particles. But it is also correct that there is a unity through the whole thing. So in just the same way, we looking myopically at our own lives and seeing ourselves all as separate bodies and feeling that each one of us has a separate time beginning with birth and ending with death, we are blind to the way in which each one of us is really absolutely integrated with everything else that's going on. But so long as we're all brought up to feel that we are here on sufferance, then we are, to that extent, emotionally prejudiced against seeing that each one of us is really a particular way of looking at all that there is, and a particular way of being responsible for all that there is. You, in other words, yes, you did it, and are to be praised or blamed, or neither, for everything that's happening. When we say, well, that wasn't my fault, it was those scapegoats, whether they be Jews, communists, Turks, infidels, heretics, Chinese, Vietnamese, Africans, any Catholics, Birchers, New Leftists, anybody you can think of you don't like. You can always say, well, they started it. They're the cause of the trouble. But the real secret is that you're responsible for everything that's going on. And there is in you everything that is angelic about human beings and everything that's diabolic. And the question is, how do you play those two together? So putting it in this way, then, I would say simply that life is the play, and I underline the word play, of a single energy. And you are that energy. That energy, like all energy, is a pulsation. And therefore we have the appearance and disappearance of its pulses. You could say, I, defined as a certain human body called Alan Watts, am a pulse of this energy. And therefore I have, my presence is inseparable from my absence, as is the case with all waves and pulses. A wave must have an upside and a downside, or shall we say a crest and a trough, where it is and where it isn't. And so every pulse of the universal energy has an on and an off. We call that life and death. Or it may be waking and sleeping, or now you see it, now you don't. And this thing is just what we all are. From the highest point of view, it never makes mistakes. When you watch the clouds, did you ever accuse a cloud of being aesthetically malformed? Did you ever think that mountains were to be criticized for their outline? Did you ever think that the stars were badly arranged, or that the patterns in foam had something to be desired? No. But of course we feel that about ourselves just because of our close point of view to ourselves. If we looked at ourselves sub specie eternitatis, from the standpoint of eternity, we should see that our lives, in every detail and in every respect, were as harmonious and exquisite as the patterns on seashells. And we should find that everything that was a mistake, that was done wrong, was actually an integral part of a harmonious relationship. Only we couldn't see it that way from our limited point of view. So one could say that at the highest level, this universe is an incomparable jewel of harmonious, dancing, patterning energy. Very intelligent, in the sense of, what do we mean by intelligence? A complex, harmonious design. Included in this harmonious design is, of course, the fact that we feel it not to be so. Our objections to what we wrongly think of as the disharmony of the universe, the very fact that those objections occur, are an integral part of the harmony. So that if I feel furious with somebody like Hitler because he kills ever so many people, like the massacre of the Jews, I would not say that it was wrong for me to feel furious, but simply that too, if his slaying of the Jews is after all part of this harmonious thing, so is my fury about it. From the highest point of view, the most inclusive point of view, it all goes together. And if you understand that, if you actually feel in your bones, if you sense that as a vivid sensation, a very curious thing happens to you. You are able to function in your everyday life without hang-ups. It's like this. Everybody is really using an enormous amount of energy protecting themselves. And a lot of the energy we're using is only thinking about how we would protect ourselves if we were challenged to do so. We waste an incredible amount of psychic energy in the state of inner cramp, tension, of anxiety about what will happen if. Supposing. Now, put yourselves in the position of realizing that you're walking and dancing around in a space like a trapeze artist. But there's no concrete below you to fall onto. You can do anything you want, any crazy act, flip any way you wish. And although you may go through the illusion of a crash, there is never a real crash. You've nothing to lose, because you are, in fact, the whole works. Only, the whole works has a most interesting device in it, which is pretending that it's in danger, that it could come to a final end. This is the familiar phenomenon of goosing yourself, of giving yourself a scare, as if the universe were a system that crept up behind itself and said, "Whoa!" So it jumps. See? And each jump is like the new spring of the grasshopper going along. Every time it gets itself, boom, it jumps, you see? Boom, it jumps like this. Because you have to understand this. This is terribly important. A lot of people think, you see, that the goal of life, the thing that you really should get hold of is power, to be in control. And you can take all kinds of lessons on master your life, be in control of this, be in control of that. Now let me let you into a secret. What the real meaning of all these things is that when you study the whole philosophy and psychology of power, and you really go to the end of it, you'll find that that's not what you want. Imagine, let your fantasy go. Make yourself the master magician. You can read everybody's mind. You know the future completely and clearly. You need not be subject to the ordinary conditions of nature. Supposing, for example, you could renew your body all the time and never need to die. Supposing you could be anywhere you wanted to be in the universe at the slight quiver of a whim. Go through this. Think this through. Everybody thinks they want power. But if you really think through what situation you would be in if you had absolute power, you would say, man, who needs it? You wouldn't want it, because you would be completely bored. So power is not the thing we really want. There is nothing more instructive in the world than to think out systematically and thoroughly what it is that you do want. And curiously enough, the best you will come to is that you don't know. Because you want a surprise. Now, you can't surprise yourself. You see? If you're in control and you plan a surprise, it's obviously not a surprise. But you see, once you could imagine God, who came to the conclusion in eternity that he knew it all. He had to create something and said to it, surprise me. And that was man. Of course it was God, because God had a system in himself whereby he could let his left hand not know what his right hand was doing. It's like when you play chess with yourself, and you take each side in the game, quite honestly, and try to make it win. One of the most interesting exercises, take a couple of knitting needles, or those cocktail picks that look like swords, and have a fencing match between your left hand and your right hand, and really try to get digs in, but let the other hand be equally defensive against the digs. It's very interesting. That's a good exercise in yoga, to do that. Find out a lot about yourself that way. Let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth. But that's the sort of system we're in, you see. That's like this universe. Because if you understand that you don't want power, not really. You always want to be getting a little more power, but you don't want final power. Because then nothing would happen. It's just like when you're playing a game, maybe bridge, maybe chess, or whatever it is. And at the moment that the outcome of the game becomes certain, you cancel the game and begin again. Because there's no fun in a game with a certain outcome. Might just as well not play it. Because any future that is certain is already past in the sense that you've had it. So, I look then upon what we're doing in this world. Every one of us is a particular expression at a particular time and a particular place of the whole thing. Basically, you are the witch than which there is no witcher. You are the Godhead. And you don't have to think of that in terms of an old gentleman with a beard. You are basically the Godhead. But this energy, intelligent energy, is capable of expressing itself in myriads of forms, each one with a different point of view. Like your eyes look out of your head, each one with a different point of view. All your nerve ends are there in your skin, almost like the horns on a little snail, all feeling around. Every one is you, looking from a different point of view towards the world. So, in turn, I can see all human beings' eyes as many, many horns on a cosmic snail, all looking out from a single center. All of us. Appearing and disappearing, coming and going. We pop out and we pop in. We are born and we die. We are thrown out and withdrawn. And as you watch this, you see, from a larger point of view, you see a throbbing rhythm, each time coming out with a different variation. One day we could call it John Doe, the next time it's Jimmy Smith, the next time it's, it throbs. It has little subtle variations in it each time, each one worthy of being given a different name. But it's all the same energy doing this. Now, obviously, if you aren't aware of that, and you think seriously that you're just poor little me, who got thrown into this world by some irresponsible parents, and is saddled suddenly with all these problems, and that all it's going to be is that you've got to struggle along as long as you can, and maybe raise some children to struggle along in the same idiotic way you do, and then give up. And you generally feel frustrated and cheated by the whole scheme of things, because you do not acknowledge that you are responsible for it. That you got yourself into this situation. That you were the evil gleam in your father's eye when he pursued your mother. You were your father. Because he feels in just the same situation you did. He feels he's an eye, too, cast into this world. And he may have been brought up, just like you, to feel that he had nothing to do with anything else, that he was somehow disconnected from the whole scheme of things, and merely experiencing it passively as something that happens to you, that is thrown upon you. So long as you choose to feel about things in that way, you complain and you are frustrated, and you're fighting and bitching about the whole thing. Which is, of course, all right, because that's what you want to do. Only that you could see there's a certain joke in that. Indicates that it could be different. That you don't need to be in that state of mind in regard to it. That you could wake up from this illusion of separateness and understand that you aren't just a little animalcule crawling around on the surface of a globular rock that revolves around an insignificant star on the outer edge of one of the minor galaxies. But that you are a special case of the center, what there is and of all that there is. You know, it's interesting that in a view of the universe, which sees space as curved, imagine for a moment, this is not quite correct, but that all objects in space are on the surface of a sphere. Then you will see at once that every point on the surface of a sphere can be regarded as the center of the surface. What is it in which everything is happening? There is a central point. We can legitimately regard every point in this universe as being the center of the whole thing. Multi-centered sense that every eye which looks around and sees the world as something that spins around you, you're the axis. You're quite correct. It does. But you know how it is when you hold in your hand a gyroscope, isn't it? It always feels alive, doesn't it? Because it surprises you. It wants to move in a direction which you didn't predict. And that movement of the gyroscope that you hold, that seems to be against you, is the movement in life we call other, or what happens to us. When we feel, on the other hand, that I am moving the gyroscope in the direction I want it to go, that's what we call self. That's what we call voluntary. And you can't possibly know the one without the other. You don't know what you mean by self unless you know what you mean by other. And you don't know what you mean by the voluntary, what I want to happen, except in contrast and play against the involuntary, what happens to me. But just as in the gyroscope, the voluntary and the involuntary, the self and the other, are two poles of the same experience. So, when you understand this, it is as if you had become one with, or had a firm grasp of, the axis of the gyroscope. And you know that when the north side is going the way I want it, the south side is going in the opposite way. And it's really all one. Only it has to polarize itself in this way, so that there shall be something happening. Condition of the game. So then, we can say then there are two poles in another way. We'll call one pole involution and the other pole evolution. Involution is all that aspect of life in which we get involved. In the schemes, in the games, in the conflicts, in the quarrels. So involved that we lose sight of the forest and the trees. And there comes a point, as in every movement, where that is so extreme that it has to swing up again in another direction, where we see the forest over and above the trees. That is evolution. Where we, for example, in our present-day culture, have gone through a historical sort of psychological historical development, emphasized our consciousness of ourselves as individuals. It's extraordinary. Never before have people concerned themselves so much with the plight of the individual. Never before have there been such social services, paper, that take every person into consideration, or at least go through the motion of doing so. Never before was it thought important that every individual should have the chance of being given possibilities. All people. But in doing this, we've raised a new kind of problem. The individual, having been brought to so great a realization of his individuality, because of the importance which society places upon him, isn't quite sure that that's where he wanted to be. Be careful of what you desire, you may get it. The individual, so critically emphasized, therefore turns towards going beyond individuality. Now he can do that in two ways. He can go beyond individuality by submerging himself. That is to say, by mindless and thoughtless adoption of a fanaticism. By joining some mass movement, some fanatical religion, some form of screwy politics. And by working for this cause, be equally delivered from individuality as if he became stone drunk. The same thing, there's nothing much to do. Or by going right to the extreme of individuality. Instead of trying to forget one's lonely self, ego, go right into it. And through becoming an individual as intensely as you can become, and becoming as separate as you can get, you will discover in a very natural way that you are the eternal self. There's that wonderful passage that is quoted in the memoirs of the poet Benson, where he describes the way in which, as a young boy, he often used to be alone and used to repeat his own name to himself. Alfred. Alfred. And you know, Phoenix, this thing called Alfred, this particular eye is kind of spooky. You look at yourself in the mirror. Don't look away, you know. Other people feel awkward when they look. I want to look. Sometimes you can feel your own thoughts. You feel like you're going to flop inside your finger starts to itch. You want to rub it off like that. Your own inner processes, your own gut, is something real. If you don't turn away from it, you keep looking right into your own eyes in the mirror. First you say, you rascal, you fraud, you devil. You go on looking. You go deeper and deeper and deeper looking into your own eyes. Then Tennyson goes on to say, after he'd said this name Alfred to himself every time, of this extraordinary feeling coming over him, in which he knew with total certainty that beyond this little thing called Alfred, there was this absolutely eternal life that was forever and ever, was the root and ground of everything. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going back in your mind to childhood, feeling that there's an immeasurably ancient you behind your childhood. A very knowing, ancient of days. That's what happens when you go through the experience of individuality to an extreme point. It very naturally explodes into the universal. Whereas if you withdraw from individuality, you are liable never to come across that. You just get caught up in the fashions and fads and customary escapes, which are the solace of most people. That's, you see, the reason for being a hermit. Hermits are people who pursue individuality to an extreme. They go off into complete solitude. And the most interesting thing you will find in a state of complete solitude, when you get really alone, you find that you're connected with everything. Because what happens in this state of solitude is that your ears become sensitive. You hear all the sounds you weren't accustomed to. You hear your own heartbeat. You hear the singing in your own ears. You hear the buzz of innumerable tiny insects you never paid attention to. You hear the sound of the wind and every leaf responds. And you suddenly realize that the leaves rippling to the wind and your eardrums rippling to it are all one process. That you, indeed, are like a whirlpool in the street. The pattern is constant, but the water is always changing. You are a shimmering manifestation like the flame of a candle. It is really a stream of gas, never for 2 minutes the same. You are a dancing vibration, and on either end of you is the whole energy of the universe, flowing through what is called you and wiggling in the recognizable form and going on. You are a wave waving of this energy, and we're all that, doing that. The hermit finds this out, because by going into complete isolation, he discovers there is no isolation. He becomes so sensitive to every tiny part. When he discovers that, then the good hermit comes back into the world. And even though he's involved in the busyness and turmoil of everyday life, he still sees this. So what is important for us is we're all, most of us, involved in some kind of frantic business. And what I want to suggest to you is that this frantic business can be your yoga, your way of liberation. You don't have to get out of it. You don't necessarily have to drop out, although that's important for some people. Depends whether you have the vocation to drop out or whether you have the vocation to stay in. But I would not only say would help to make your everyday life into a yoga, but that you won't really be able to stand it if you don't.
The Scissor Man is
It's
everywhere.
not as some people say, can we Westerners practice Oriental disciplines? Because the question is, if you can't, you're not going to survive. You won't be able to take it. So let's get to the point of view where we can see certain types of activity which are normally associated with extreme anxiety, such as various forms of business where we always worry whether we're going to make a payment, whether we're going to make a profit, whether we're going to do this, that, and the other. And day to day, there's this constant anxiety going on. Now, there is a point of view from which those activities can be conducted as complete play and dancing. And you realize that you don't give a damn how it comes out. And it's only when you get to the point that you don't give a damn that you can afford to If you do give a damn, you can't get afford to get involved. So it's terribly important not to give a damn. We ordinarily think that people who don't give a damn will collapse on the job, have no motivation, because they're not striving for power anymore. You realize that the striving for power is futile. But if you realize that striving for power is futile, what else would you do? What other zest will there be? Other people think that if you deprive people of the urge for power, they will have no motivation to do anything. What would be the motivation of power? They're not interested. Why would you do anything? Why would you make any effort? control them. What do you put in place to describe power? Fun. Yeah? What to be surprised? Right. Yes, but you will realize now at once that there are several alternatives. There isn't only the fun, which is one of them, but say, there is also compassion, where you see a lot of human beings are really suffering, and you can feel now, goodness, it's not necessary. You don't have to do it that way, and this may supply a great deal of energy. You see, but the moment your energy is released from the power game and from the self-protection game, it's free to do all kinds of other things. You get a tremendous access. Now wait a minute. Let's have an intermission now, and then we can bring up questions after about 5 minutes intermission. Okay? Yesterday I was giving you a general outline of the foundations of the Zen feeling for naturalness in art and life by describing the fundamental principles of the Taoist philosophy and then of the Zen discipline itself. And we saw that the roots of the idea of spontaneous living make this conception, or rather it isn't so much a conception as a doing, something much more subtle than might ordinarily be imagined. A lot of people think that the spontaneous or completely natural life as it's understood by these Far Eastern philosophers is to act according to whim. There was, for example, a great Zen monk lived shortly after 1000 AD who had a very peculiar way of painting. He had long hair, and he'd get very drunk on rice wine. Then he'd soak his hair in ink and slosh it all over the paper. Then he would do a Rorschach test on it and decide what kind of a landscape it actually was, and then put in the finishing touches. And suddenly, out of this apparent mess, a great landscape would be evoked. But the whole art of the thing lay in putting in the finishing touches. And also, there's a very curious thing. If a person who is untrained in painting makes a mess with a brush, it's liable to be just a mess. Whereas if a person who has the feeling of painting in them for a long time, and they make a mess with a brush or just do anything, it looks interesting. And that's why if you try to copy the best people in modern abstract non-objective painting, you find it's a very difficult thing to do. Because there is more to spontaneity than caprice and disorder. And I want to try and explain what that is. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could live absolutely on the spur of the moment? Not make any particular plans, not feel that, well, you might make plans, because you can make plans spontaneously, but not to worry about whether you had made the right decision, whether you were being good or bad, selfish or unselfish, and not hesitate in anything, you see? One of the great applications of Zen, as I pointed out, was for the art of fencing. And when you learn fencing, you see, you have to learn to be spontaneous, because here of all places it is true that he who hesitates is lost. If you're engaged in combat, you see, you stop to think what sort of a defense or attack you ought to make. The end is rupture. So the way they teach people spontaneity in fencing is very interesting. When you start in fencing school, you of course live with the teacher. He has a kind of passion. And if you're given a janitorial job, you clean up, you wash dishes, you put bedding away and things like that, while you're going about your daily business, the master surprises you with a practice sword, which is made of 4 strips of bamboo, rather loosely tied together. And he hits you with this, surprisingly and suddenly, from nowhere. And you are expected to defend yourself with anything available. With the bedding, with the broom, with the pots and pans, with just anything, defend. But the poor student never knows when the attack is coming, or what direction it's coming from, and he begins to get tense. And he begins to go around everywhere on the sort of alert, you see, watching which direction it's coming from. And as he goes down a certain passage, feeling that the master is probably lurking around that corner, and he's all set to go for him, if he gets that practice sword, he suddenly gets hit from behind. So eventually, he gives up. There's absolutely no way of preparing for the attack. And so he just wanders around, feeling, well, if it's going to hit, and then he's ready to begin fencing. Because if you prepare for an attack from a specific direction, and it comes from some other direction, you have to withdraw from the direction in which you had expected it, and send your energy in another direction, and that takes time. So what you do is, you go around with a mind of no expectation. That is called mushin, or munen. This is a very important Zen expression. Mushin, it almost means an empty mind.
no sin. You could also call it no heart, because the character shin means both heart and mind, but it isn't quite the same as our word heartless, as we use it, and it isn't the same as the word mindless as we use it, meaning stupid. To be in the state of mushin is to have a mind like a mirror. And the Taoist sage Zhuangzi said, the perfect man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing, it refuses nothing, it receives but does not keep. And when anything comes in front of the mirror, it reflects it instantly. The mirror doesn't wait to reflect it. They also say, when the moon rises, all bodies of water instantly reflect the moon. I mean, they don't bother with physics about the speed of light or anything like that. It's irrelevant. Or they say when you clap your hands, the sound issues immediately. It doesn't stop to consider whether it will issue. And so sparks from the flint, when it's struck, they issue instantly. But to do this, you can't try to be quick. See, if a Zen master corners you with a funny situation, and he puts you in a quandary, expecting spontaneous action from you, don't try to hurry. I know, I've watched Suzuki wait a whole minute before answering, but he doesn't hesitate. He's not at all embarrassed by this wait, and he can answer with silence just as well as with a formal response. The point is, do something. When two young Americans wanted to study Zen, they were taken by a Japanese monk to interview the master and act as interpreter. And one of them had had some practice, he knew a bit about it. And so after they'd had tea together and just discussed formalities, the master said in a very easy way, well, what do you gentlemen know about Zen? And one of these students threw his fan, which he hadn't unfolded, the fan was still folded up, he threw it straight at the master's face. The master slightly moved to one side, and the fan went and went right through the paper wall. And the master laughed like a child. Well, that's the sort of game they get in. Once a master was going around through the forest with a group of students, and he picked up a tree branch. Notice that one might pick up a tree branch. Suddenly he turned to one of the students and said, what is it? And he hesitated to hit him with the branch. And so another student was there, and he turned to him quickly. He said, what is it? He said, give it to me, I want to see it. I'll tell you. So the master tossed the branch to him, and he couldn't hit the branch. Now, you may think all this is kind of rough stuff. But let me give you another story, which is on a rather different level. A certain Zen priest was having dinner at a big party, and the party was being served by a geisha girl who was so elegant and so skillful at serving that he suspected she might have some Zen training. So he decided to try her out. And he nodded to her. She immediately came to his place and sat down in front of his little low table. See, everybody would be seated, probably, in front of low tables all around the room, and the geisha servants would move up and down the middle. So she came down and sat down in front of his side, and he said, I would like to give you a present. She said, I would be most honored. Now, on the table, there are hibachi, which are little braziers with hot charcoal in, and you move the charcoal around with iron chopsticks. He took a piece of charcoal out of iron chopsticks and offered it to her. She had long, long sleeves on her kimono, and what she did was this. She wound them all around her hands, took the charcoal, immediately got up and went to the kitchen, disposed of the charcoal, changed her robe, which had holes burned almost all the way through the sleeves, and came back. And she sat down in front of the master and bowed. And she said to him, I would like to give you a present. He said, I would be most honored. And so she picked up the iron chopstick and handed him the charcoal. And he pulled out a cigarette and said, that's just what I wanted, and lit the cigarette. Now, here's the lesson. The master's spontaneity and being ready for that situation was the kind of quick thinking that a good comedian has, who, in a completely unprepared way, can make all sorts of jokes and turn any situation into a jest of some kind. There are all sorts of people who do that. People who are experts in kind of like Dorothy Parker, in that sort of repartee. But here it's been developed in a very fundamental way and to a very high degree. Now, the way in which it's developed, you see, requires a protected situation. Because if we all started to act on the spur of the moment, without the slightest consideration or deliberation, no. No, come on. Come on, kitty. Shoot. Okay, you come with me now. And, oh, all right. If we all started to act on pure whim, everybody would think we were crazy. And people would avoid us and call the police and things like that. But what they do is this. They start you doing this in the context of a disciplined situation, where there are very rigid rules for most of the time, but there are certain instances at which all those rules go hang. And you're in a community which understands the game. Because the point is this, when you start acting spontaneously, you're not used to doing it, and therefore your responses are unintelligent and inappropriate. But when you become used to doing this, and when it becomes second nature to you, to act in the state of mushin, of no mind, or no deliberation, then your behavior has matured. And you find that you're accustomed to respond quite appropriately, as the Zen master did in lighting his cigarette from the charcoal. So also in learning the art of swordsmanship, when he has given up defending himself, and okay, Kitty. when he's given up defending himself and preparing his mind for attack, then he's got a mirror mind. This is also likened to a vessel of water, like a wooden barrel. When you make a hole in the barrel, the water instantly flows out of the hole, because the water is always available to come out. It doesn't have to choose. And so you could also say that Mushin is what Krishnamurti calls choicelessness. And because you see, choice in this sense is not quite the same thing as decision. Choice means dithering. You know, there are some people who, before they start to write something down, they wiggle their pens a little. Pen dithers over the paper, and then they start to write. And so in the same way, a lot of people constantly in the life situation, they dither, because that dithering is anxiety. To be or not to be, that is the question. Well, there is no question about to be or not to be. See, because to be and not to be go together, as we saw, they arise mutually. And so, Kitty, I don't think you're feeling very comfortable. Would you like to see if you can take care of it? I don't want her to get mixed up in the thick toilet. So then, in the situation of the Zen community, safeguards are set up within which you can learn how to act without deliberation, which is, you see, in a sense, going back to the state of innocence. Now, it doesn't mean that you give up thinking. It doesn't mean that you become an anti-intellectual. You all can also learn, and this is part of the later phases of Zen training, how to think spontaneously, how to deliberate spontaneously. The saying is, you see, stand or walk as you will, but whatever you do, don't wobble. So this is our difficulty, because the human mind is a feedback system. Feedback has a peculiar susceptibility to nervousness. There was a young man who said, though, it seems that I know that I know. What I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know. You see? Now, in this way, we think about thinking. We worry about worrying. And then when that really gets bad, you worry because you worry about worrying. Now, that is analogous exactly to the kinds of vibration that are set up in certain mechanical systems. For example, if you, I did this trick on television once. I had the cameraman turn the camera on the monitor. The monitor is the television set in the studio where you see what you're doing. And so on the show I said, now I'm going to show you a picture of anxiety. Don't worry about your sets. There's not going to be anything wrong with your set, so don't turn it off. Now I said, Mr. Cameraman, will you please turn the camera on the monitor? He does that. Now what does he do? He's taking a picture of taking a picture, all in the same system. And as you do that, the system starts going like that. You see, it makes a sense up a kind of oscillation. And you see on the screen all these jagged lines dancing across. Now that's what's meant, you see, by hesitation, attachment, blocking, all that kind of thing which the Zen discipline is designed to overcome. And because the human being is such a peculiarly, beautifully organized nervous system, and has this tremendously subtle cortex, which is capable of all kinds of thinking about thinking, you could turn yourself on in the most extraordinary ways by, for example, getting earphones which repeat what you say just a fraction of a second after you say it. In fact, they delay it. And you can get an oscilloscope tied up with your own heartbeats and get feedback through in this way so that you suddenly begin to see yourself behaving, and it completely balls you up because you wait for yourself to go on, but then you realize it's you doing it, but you can't wait on your heartbeat, you can't wait on what you say. And you get this sensation of going faster and faster and faster and faster until you just have to close the whole thing off. You'll go crazy. So that's what we're doing. And our civilization and our social institutions reflect this in hundreds of ways. And this would be true of any civilization, because all civilization is based on the development of consciousness and feedback, that is to say, the property of self-control, of being self-conscious, looking at what you've done, and then being able to criticize it and correct it. But who criticizes? Is the critic reliable? When you criticize yourself, who will criticize the critic? You see? Or to put it in the other way, quis custodiae ipsos custodies. Who will guard the guards themselves? Who will take care of the policemen? Who will govern the president? And that is the big problem. And when we get tied up in that problem, the Chinese got tied up in it because they were simply a very high order of civilization. So did the Japanese. There has to be a break. Somebody has to start throwing things. Otherwise, everybody will go insane. So Zen functions in that culture as a way of liberation from the tangle of being too civilized. Now, you see, in Japanese culture, people are tremendously concerned with propriety, with good manners, and with keeping up with the Germans. One of the funniest things in the world is to watch Japanese people having a bowing contest. It's a very frequent thing when friends meet or take leave. They go, and they bow and they bow and they respond, and it goes back and forth and see who gets the last one in because I'm more polite than you. And the worries about when somebody comes, you visit a family, you always bring a gift. And they start worrying, is this gift suitable? What is it? Anything as good as the gift they last gave us? And is it right for the occasion? Have we thought about it enough? Is there some symbolism in this gift that connects with this person's name or their birthday or something like that? And they think about these things eternally. And thus they cultivate it in the ordinary culture. Has a great deal of social nervousness in it. People giggle. You often see girls who giggle and cover their mouths. Say, I'm not really giggling. All sorts of funny things happen because of this immense social awareness and nervousness. Now, Zen breaks that up. Only it does it in a way that has high artistry to it. So you see, let's just take the aesthetic domain for the moment. And you remember I was discussing yesterday one T-boat. And you remember, too, that in the whole history of ceramics, the Chinese developed some of the most elegant work imaginable. You are probably aware, I don't see a specimen, of the great work of the Sung and Korean potters. Very often done in a jade-like green, the most gorgeous texture. It looks practically as if it was carved out of jade. Well, that led on, you see, to the high techniques of the Ming Dynasty, with translucent porcelain, white clay, the most subtle designs of all. And that style went also to Japan. And the very, very rich people you read about in, say, books like The Tale of Genji, and you see in a film, and you must see it, Chushingura, the story of the 47 Ronin. The lovely things they had around their houses were unbelievable. The lacquer, the boxes in pure gold, and it was delicious stuff. But then, it was just like having too much eclairs and ice cream and filet mignon and cooked à la carême, that French cook who made everything look like an oriental palace. And now what happened? The people who practiced Zen suddenly got an eye for the beauty of the ordinary. There were two reasons for this. One was that they became fascinated with what happened spontaneously, what pattern a brush would make when handled roughly and the hairlines were shown. They also, because they were sitting quietly, not thinking of anything special, but having a completely open mind. That puts you into a state where you get much better eyes and ears than you ordinarily have. And you start really seeing things. So you know that famous haiku poem, the old pond, the frog jumps in, plop. In Japanese, that plop is mizo no oto, the sound of the water. And there's another poem just like it, in the dark forest, a berry drops, the sound of the water. Somebody suddenly realized, you see, just the sound of the water is marvelous. That's all. Or they found that they kept getting in very, very cheap Korean rice bowls. The poorest, cheapest kind for peasants to eat out of. And suddenly it struck one of these Zen masters that was an incomparably beautiful object. Nobody had seen this before.
Good morning, my little...
They also had the simplest wooden ladles, bamboo, and then a stick in it for use in the kitchen. And one day somebody noticed that this ordinary, everyday kitchen utensil was just lovely. And so in the same way, they found that it was quite as satisfactory to listen to the kettle boiling as to listen to an elaborate concert. So what did they do? They started, through particularly a man called Senno Rikyu, to give parties, very small, few guests, in shacks, little huts in the garden, made of very primitive materials, such as mud walls, and where they would go and sit And out of the simplest utensils, carefully chosen by a superb artist, they would simply sit and enjoy the uncomplicated life. And so was born the tea ceremony. Now look at that, you see, in the historical context. That's terribly important. It was a going back to the primitive after people were sick of too much civilization. And yet, it was going on to the primitive rather than back. Because the people who selected all those things, they knew the whole tradition of their civilization, their culture. They weren't barbarians. Once upon a time, then you see, when this became the rage, Rikyu became attached to the court. The shogun had tea with Rikyu. Everybody started digging tea ceremony. And in due course, the whole thing became awful. Because what's happened today is this. Tea ceremony is essentially something to enjoy. And there are a few men left who know how to serve tea ceremony. And it's an extremely congenial, quiet get-together of easy conversation, simple and unostentatious manners, and really lovely things to look at. I was present at a tea ceremony celebrated by a Zen monk who happens to be an American. And he is a man who has done a lot of mountaineering. And he has, therefore, with him at all times, the sort of equipment that you take on camping in the mountains, because he does a lot of climbing in Japan. And I said to him, won't you, this afternoon would be very nice to have the tea ceremony, and you did it once before here, and it was so pleasant. Would you serve it again? He said, yes, by all means. Before, he had served tea ceremony in the style that Zen monks do it, which is rather simple and direct and much more comfortable than all these well-educated ladies who are tittering about it and are on tiptoe and nervous and hoping they won't make a mistake and all that kind of thing. It was dreadful. So he suddenly came in with a small Primus stove. He set that down. Then he had an old paint pot, which had inside it an aluminum mug. He set that down. He then proceeded to take the aluminum mug out, pour water into the paint pot, and set that on the Primus stove, but he ritually pumped up the Primus stove. He did everything in the style of tea ceremony, but this was a dirty old Primus stove. And suddenly the thing began to flame like the god Fudo, and he mixed the tea in the traditional way with the whisk, had all the perfect, lovely manners, handing us the aluminum cup. And we got into it's a custom after the tea ceremony, after you've drunk, to pass all the utensils round for inspection. And this is exactly what happened. And we found that the aluminum cup had the year 1945 stamped on it for some reason. We got into a discussion about styles of aluminum cups made in 1945. And it was the funniest thing, but it was a complete makeover of the tea ceremony into the modern idiom. Of course, the tea drunk in tea ceremony is that powdered green tea, which you don't steep like you make ordinary tea. You whisk it and mix with a small amount of hot water into a froth. And it's called liquid jade. And it's a bit of an acquired taste for most Westerners. It tastes a little bit like a mixture of mate tea and Guinness. But when you get to know it, it's very invigorating and very awakening. And if you make up a strong mixture of it, it's a good thing to use if you want to stay awake all night and do work. So you see, the legend was that Zen monks started this interest in tea because they needed it to stay awake during their practice of meditation. And it said that Bodhidharma, whom I drew for you yesterday, and he's always drawn with eyes that are wide open. Why? Because he hasn't got any eyelids. Once when he was meditating, he fell asleep, and he was furious and cut his eyelids off. And as they dropped on the ground, up came the first tea plants. That's why they have leaves shaped like eyelids, and are to be drunk ever thereafter for staying awake. So the plant of Buddhism, the tea is the Buddhist drink, just like wine is the Christian drink, coffee is the Islamic drink, and milk the Hindu drink. Every religion has its drink. So then around this kind of appreciation, born of stillness and the delight in seeing how nature takes its course, came the entire cult of Zen art with its special kind of primitivity, its special ceramics, its special calligraphic styles, and its special gardens, which are the controlled accident. Now you see, as I showed you yesterday on that other tea bowl, this is a water jar. And they like to leave the bottom unglazed. You can really see that it's glazed that way. But look, you see how the glaze has been allowed to run. It's what we would call not neat at all. And you watch somebody make one of these. And I have watched a man just pick up the plate, and as he applies the design of the glaze, he just goes whoosh with a brush. and lets it drop on him, and it's gone. There's another man who glazes by wood smoke, and in his kiln he may put about 1,100 pieces, and he wraps them in straw. And wherever the straw touches, it leaves a splash of orange color against the purple background. Now, you see, the straw arranges itself according to the nature of straw. It doesn't follow strict human direction. And the fascination is when they open up that kiln and bring the things out, they look eagerly to see what has the straw done. So this principle of letting glaze run to see what will happen is
breathtaking room.
Wu Wei. This is non-interference. This is Mu Xin also. No purpose, or it can also be translated, no specific intent. And now, of course, you see, sometimes this doesn't work. And the master picks it up and says, that's not very interesting, and rejects it. What are the canons of taste which decide whether he will accept one of these accidents or reject it? Because here an additional principle of control enters. See, say in the practice of calligraphy, a man may sit down with a huge pile of paper in front of him and do piece after piece after piece, and if it isn't just right, he throws it away. So he eventually makes a selection that comes out. There's a famous story of a Zen master who was doing calligraphy, and he had a very smart monk standing beside him who was his assistant. And the monk said, to each one as he did it, you can do better than that. Oh, no, come now, you know much better than that. This master got more and more furious, but the monk had to go out to the benjo, to the toilet for a moment. And he thought, quick, while he's away, he did it. And the monk came back and looked at me and said, a masterpiece. So there's this element of selection. You see, now what determines this? How do you know? Or another example of this, there was a tea caddy, porcelain tea caddy, not porcelain but clay. And when Sen no Rikyu was having tea ceremony, he saw this tea caddy and made no comment on it. And the owner was so disappointed that he smashed it. But one of his friends picked the broken pieces out of the trash can and took them to a mender. He said, look, mend this with gold. And he put therefore gold cement and put this caddy back together, and so it had all over its surface spidery lines of gold. And when Rikyu saw that, he was just enchanted, and it became one of the most valuable tea caddies in the Japanese collections. Spidery lines of gold following just the apparently chance marks of a smash. There was a competition at the Art Institute in the University of Chicago, in which it was a sculpture class, and the competition was that each student was given a cubic foot of plaster of Paris. And they said, now do something with it. Well, the prize was won by a woman who looked at this cube and said, it has no character, it doesn't want to be anything. So she flung it on the floor and smashed it all up. I mean, she made dents in it and banged off the corners and put cracks in it and things. Then she looked at it again and said, now I know what it wants to be. And so she followed the grain in it, as it were, made by all these cracks, and produced this marvelous piece of sculpture. You have in this area a very ingenious sculptor by the name of Donald Hord, who is a master at following the grain in wood and actually making the grain. The grain seems to suggest to him the muscles and the flow of the kind of body that he's making. Well, that's the thing. So when a master decides whether the accident came off, what he wants is this. He wants the thing to be the perfect harmony of man and nature, of order and randomness. Now, this is a curious thing in the human mind. When we play games, we get most fascination out of those games which satisfactorily combine skill and chance. Games like bridge, poker, have a sort of admirable combination of these two elements. And we can go on playing those games again and again and again, because you don't feel completely at the mercy of chance, as you do with dice, unless you cheat. And you don't feel completely at the mercy of skill, as you do with chess, or especially with a game like three-dimensional chess. So there's a sort of optimum middle where order and randomness go together, looking for. He's looking for the optimal combination. You see, the things that are artwork like Persian miniatures or the jewelry of Cellini, and skill. Too much order. It's like those houses you go into where you daren't put an ash in the tray because everything is so clean and everything is so tidy, you daren't touch it. One prefers a house, you see, that looks a little lived in. It is more genial, more comfortable, somehow invites you to sit down and even put your feet on the table. Whereas on the other extreme, everything is covered in dirt and filthy clothes are thrown in the corner and people are all paint all over them and so on. That's the other extreme. We don't want that. But that's that curious thing in the middle. Now, the most difficult thing is to hold to the middle. It's like walking a tightrope. And that's why the path of Buddhism is called the razor's edge. Because you see what happened when all this kind of work in the course of history became fashionable. People began to affect these styles. For example, when Seshu, the great master ink painter, worked, he would sometimes take a handful of straw and paint with that instead of a brush in order to get the sort of rough effect that he wanted. But later on there came people who could take an ordinary paintbrush and so exactly ink that brush that it would give precisely the messy effect that they had in mind. They would also be able to ink a brush in such a way, and this is terribly decadent, they could dab grapes on a vine and have dark ink where the shadow was supposed to be, and no ink at all where the highlight was supposed to be. That's when they started getting mixed up with Western ideas about shadows and perspective. They didn't have that earlier. But they were so skilled in the handling of ink that they would do this sort of thing, and they would imitate, you see, all the so-called rough natural effects of the great Zen artists. And so today in Japan, a younger generation of artists has decided it's time to break all that up. If you imagine, for example, haiku parties, the writing of haiku poetry. Basho, who was the great 17th century master of haiku, said, get a 3-foot child to write haiku, because they're the sort of direct, guileless things that children would say. But now there are magazines devoted to haiku poetry, where in every issue there will be 10,000 haikus, written by people all over the country. And they get so stilted and so affected that one had never heard of haiku. The same thing is starting over here. And you should see the entries we get in these haiku competitions that Japan Airlines and other people sponsor. But it all after a while becomes dated, stilted. And so somewhere again, the new thing has to break out, which is always coming up. But there's no formula, you see, for fixing it so that you can do it again and again and again, because the moment you start doing it again and again and again, it isn't it anymore. The real thing is escape. Do you remember some time ago there was a passion for having wrought iron fish, just the outline of the fish? Some artist originally, put this fish together and it looked great. But then you suddenly found them in every gift shop and dime store, and they look perfectly terrible. So this is the mysterious thing. Well, not only in the arts, but in lifestyles, in everything, saying, what is the technique for getting this thing? And people say, well, this is it. It's gone. Same in education. Same in music. The moment you start teaching something, what question are you asking? How could is there some method whereby in our schools we could produce from the music department, every graduation ceremony, 3 musicians of the stature of Bach or Mozart? Now, if we knew how to do that, that knowledge would prevent us from being surprised by the work of these people, because we would know how it's done. And when you know how something is done, it doesn't surprise you. That's why there's a Zen poem which says, if you ask where the flowers come from, even the god of spring doesn't know. Certainly the god of spring would be supposed to know where the flowers come from, but the truth of the matter is he doesn't. And so in the same way, if you ask the Lord God, how do you create the universe? He said, I have no special method. And this is known in Zen as a very difficult, this is the most difficult virtue to attain. So many of these things begin with mu. Buji. Buji. It means nothing special. It means no business, no artificiality. In American current, real cool. So Buji is where something doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. But it is absolutely different from being modest. A Buji person may be immodest in the sense that if he knows he can do something well, he just says he can. He doesn't go at all sorts of blushing violet techniques. Buji, you see, is this mysterious quality of nothing special, no special method. Because if there is, let me repeat, if we do know the method and we know it infallibly, it ceases to be interesting. There are no surprises left. And the moment the element of surprise is gone, the zest of life is gone. That, you see, is why it's very difficult to teach Zen to yourself. because you can't easily surprise yourself. The essence, you see, of this kind of spontaneity is response to a surprise. So the master, you don't know what he's going to do, and he surprises you by trying to cure hiccups. Very difficult to cure yourself, because when you pat yourself on the back, you know when you're going to do it. So you're all ready for it. When somebody else comes up and slams you on the back, then that's a surprise, and what you needed was a surprise. Or it's like jokes. What makes you laugh about a joke is the element of surprise in it. That's why jokes aren't funny after they've been explained. So in the same way, all these Zen stories, if explained, have no effect. They're intended to produce what I would call metaphysical laughter. But this has to be a surprise. And so as to be surprised, well, there's no way of premeditating it. So you see, if you read, for example, there's a book out here called Zen by Eugen Herrigel, who studied archery. Many of you probably read this book. He had to learn to pull the bowstring in the manner of a Japanese archer and let it go, but not on purpose. He had to let it go without thinking first, I'll let it go, and then let go. He had to let it go, not on purpose. Now, that really bugged Herrigel. How do you do something not on purpose, especially if you're aiming at a target? Well, the whole point is, if you think before you shoot, it's too late. The target's moved. That's why we have a thing like beginner's luck. You see, if you simply point at something like that, if your finger was a gun, I would probably have hit the light switch. And so you get a person who's naive about a gun, will pick a gun up and bang, and the thing will drop dead. I'll never forget the first time I ever used a slingshot. Yes, a friend of mine was with me, and he was aiming away and not missing. I just picked it up, ping, and it hit. But I couldn't do it again. You get a certain naturalness there. So there was a master by the name of Ikkyu, who was a great leg puller. And he had in front of his house a very gnarled pine tree. One of those things that torted, and they loved this kind of thing. And he put a notice up by it. He said, I, Ikkyu, will pay 100 yen, which was a fair amount of money in those days, to anyone who can see this tree straight. Well, soon, there was a whole crowd of people around that tree, lying on the ground and twisting their necks and looking at it from all sorts of angles. There was absolutely no way of seeing the tree with a straight trunk. But Ikkyu had a friend who was a priest of another sect, and a smart boy went over to see this friend and said, what about this Mr. Ikkyu's tree? Oh, said the other priest, it's perfectly simple. He said, you go and tell him the answer to seeing the tree straight is to look straight at it. So this man went over to Ikkyu and said, I claim the reward. He said, you look straight at it. And Ikkyu looked at him in a funny way and said, he forked out the 100 yen and gave it to him. He said, I think you've been talking to Rosen down the street. Now, in that way, you see, just look straight at it. In other words, here's the bowstring, let go of it. All this fimble-fambling, mimble-mambling, jumble-humble about the right technique of letting go of it. Let go of it, damn it. But that's very difficult. As if I would say to you, now, everybody, let's be unself-conscious. And so finally, in desperation, you at last learn to let go of the thing, which was what you were supposed to do all the time. And then one is as again as a child. This is original innocence. So this is the meaning of the person who was asked, what do you do here in this Zen institution? He said, we eat when hungry and we sleep when tired. But he said, that's being just like everybody else. They all do that. He said, they do not. When they eat, they don't eat. They think of all sorts of extraneous matters. When they're tired, they don't sleep. They dream all kinds of dreams. So let's have an intermission, and then we can have a discussion.
This morning, I was discussing various aspects of what might be called the religion of no religion. Considering religion as a raft for crossing a river, or rather religion in the sense of dharma, not so much the doctrine as the method. Considering it as the raft for crossing a river, as the brick for knocking at a door, as a medicine to cure a sickness, which when it's worked, you get rid of. And I was showing you that this in the Far East culminated in a type of life, a way of life, where to some very large extent the outward symptoms of religiousness disappear, especially in the art form. This is to be the figure of the holy person or the deity or whatever, a branch, a rock, clouds, birds. You know, a curious thing goes on in the whole world of religious practice. And that is, the older a religion gets, the more the distance of time lends such eminence to its original founders that they become superhumanized. And the practice of the religion that they founded becomes sort of derived of power. It just sinks into going through the motions, because people say, well, we're living in a decadent age. In the past, there were these great heroes who did all these marvelous things. Buddha and Jesus and Confucius and all their great followers. But today, everybody and nobody can expect to get more than a little way. I had a friend who went to India. He was an astonishing fellow because he was earnest. He would do anything. He was full of the power of self-discipline. And he put himself under an Indian master who came to this country in the first place. And he became a vegetarian, and he practiced yoga every day, and he was determined to get that thing. So finally, his teacher told him the best place he could go to in India. And off he went, and he joined a yoga school. There was a whole faculty, and everybody was practicing yoga. And he was so earnest, and he was so devoted that within 4 weeks, he could do everything that the other students could do. And they'd been there maybe 2 or 3 years. And so when he got to that, he mastered all the physical postures and the breathing exercises and the concentration exercises. So he said to one of the older students, now, what about real samadhi? Do you get that around here? And the student said, no, none of us have got it yet. You better ask the teachers. So he began asking around the members of the faculty, what about samadhi? Do you get this? Well, they said, no, not yet. Well, he said, I'm willing, he said, to spend any amount of time here. I don't have to get back. I've got just enough funds to get by. And so I'm willing to do anything you tell me, to practice with all my heart. Can you, do any of you have samadhi? They said, well, no, not yet. Does anybody? Can you direct me to someone who does have it? Well, I said about 125 years ago there was someone who was really considered to have had it. And so then he began to think, why is it then that when the members of the faculty come out of their meditation period, they all look as if they just had a good sleep? You see? There begins to always grow up the concept of a golden age. Our forefathers, they really knew how to do it. But today, everything's falling apart. You know, people have been saying that for centuries. There is an Egyptian text on the panels of some pyramid, a temple or whatnot, 6,000 years old, in which an Egyptian priest is complaining that everybody's falling apart. So, the lesson of this is, everybody here has just as much capacity as Buddha had. Nobody, who was Buddha's teacher? Think about that. Who psychoanalyzed Freud? Somebody has to start. And so everybody has the potentiality of being the first one. So I call this problem the distance of excessive reverence. It has the disadvantage, you see, of making all these problems that we're discussing and states of consciousness that I've been talking about, it makes them seem impossibly remote, as if they were something attainable only by a very, very favored few. And that's a very frustrating attitude to get. We were discussing this morning the sense that people have when they read Zen literature, that the thing is just around the corner. I just almost was on it. See, that's a much more healthy attitude than that, oh, this thing will require many, many years of practice. Now, it so often turns out, you know, that the person who feels that it's just around the corner will feel this way for many years. Only, he won't be put off by the idea of many, many years' work yet to do, but will always be in the feeling that it's always almost instantly available. His interest will be maintained for an extraordinarily long time. Thinking of how much work there is to be done just puts some people out of commission. You know, you've got to answer a lot of letters, and they've stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. It's an appalling pile. And eventually everything gets so complicated that you're inclined to take the whole bunch of correspondence and throw it in the fire. But if you have to answer it, for some reason or other, you can only answer it one letter at a time. Same way with washing dishes. When they pile up on the drying board, and you get this mountain of dishes, you think, oh, I've got to go through that. I've done it before, I've got to do it again this afternoon, and for a year in and a year out, I can see all those dishes I've got to wash in the future, and lo and behold, the pile of dishes on the draining board grows higher and higher in your mind's eye until it's absolutely overwhelming. And you say, well, maybe some super dishwasher, some kitchen maid of the past who was a great hero, would undertake this sort of life. But poor little me, I can't do that sort of thing. Whereas the only way to wash them is one by one, as if each one was the only one you had to wash. That's obvious. So don't be discouraged by this attitude that you find so commonly among Asian peoples in their feeling about Buddhism and Hinduism, that it's something so great that it's only cut out for a very few supermen. Don't let that put you off. It may be true statistically, when you review the vast, vast multitude of human beings that there are. But so, likewise, from a statistical point of view, this group of you gathered here, and maybe some comparable groups started around the country in various places, constitute a tiny, tiny fragment of the total population. And I suppose some external observer could say, of you, rare, rare indeed are the people who are interested enough in all this to give it, a weekend's thought even. But from your own subjective standpoint, you're not a statistic. You're not one of a special elect few, such that you've joined a secret society and have become self-conscious about it. You may be, from a certain point of view, one of an elect few, but from your own point of view, you're just your own direct, perfectly straightforward self, with no particular claims to fame or whatever it may be. So don't be put off by the distance of excessive reverence when it comes to all these things. Well now, I want to take a further step in getting across the idea of thusness. I made already some mention of looking at words as if they were things that had no meaning, but were just noises, but interesting noises, just as the shape of a leaf is an interesting shape. Now, consider first of all the shape of a leaf. It's something that goes like this, you see. And it's green, and it floats on a tree. And it is a method whereby the tree absorbs moisture. And there are all sorts of people who will want to say to you, you see, really a leaf is a very rational thing. It exists so that the tree can absorb moisture, and they can go on describing it, and you see all the wonderful ways in which this little leaf works as a kind of a moisture-absorbing, breathing thing. And you say, yes, by Jove, isn't that great? That's very rational. Marvelous thing a tree is. And yet when you consider that the object of the leaf is to
oh, nothingness. Bleh! Heaven preserve us from that. But, oh, nothingness. Bleh! Heaven preserve us from that. But, oh, nothingness. Bleh! Heaven preserve us from that. But,
the whole thing about Zen is really extraordinarily simple when one doesn't try to be cute about it and beat around the bush. Zen is simply the sensation, a totally clear understanding that, to put it in Zen terms, 10,000 formations, one suchness. Or you might say, the 10,000 things, that is everything, is of one suchness.